I hate to break up good conversation, but in fact, that seems to be the job that Michael and I have been doing all day long. As soon as we get involved in a good conversation, the timekeepers here have to say, well, it's time to move on. In a way, I apologize for that. In another way, I simply take that as a sign of how smart Michael and I were in choosing the speakers that we've had here, because every one of the presentations has been first rate. In a moment, I'm going to introduce a member of the Wilson Center family who will in turn introduce our keynote speaker today. Before doing so, however, there's one other person in the room I'd like to recognize. The Charge d'Affaires of the Pakistan Embassy, Mr. Asad Khan, is with us. Stated another way, he's the de facto ambassador here, and he's got a lot on his plate, so we're delighted that you were able to spend some time with us today. I'm now going to turn things over to Bill Milam, who will get us going. Continue eating. My hunch is that there's still additional food out there, and maybe during the Q&A session you can go back out and restock your plates. But I don't want to keep us from the intellectual nourishment part of this event. So I'm going to turn things over to Bill Milam. As some of you heard me say this morning, Ambassador William Milam is a senior scholar here at the Wilson Center, a retired Foreign Service officer, U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan, as well as to several other countries, and one of the South Asian strengths of the Wilson Center. Bill will introduce our speaker. Bill, it's yours.
Thank you, Bob. This won't take very long because I think we really want to get to the minister, and we don't want to listen to me. At least I don't think you do. But there's a bio of the minister in among the things you should have picked up outside the door downstairs on the 5th floor. But you know, and you know from that he is the Federal Minister for Planning and Development and Reforms. Additionally, he's the Deputy Secretary General of the Pakistan Muslim League, Nawaz, and therefore an important member of the current government, which has taken office about 4 or 5 months ago. And he's been a long-standing member of the party, and has held many other positions in the public sector, including Minister of Education and Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, and Chief Coordinator for the Vision 2010 for Pakistan, which is a very interesting process. I asked him what else he wanted me to say, and he said, well, that's about it. But that isn't about it, I know, but I think I won't say anything more about his bio. But I asked him what he was going to talk about, and he said, well, of course, the challenges of urbanization in Pakistan, which seems appropriate to this gathering, so I'm glad he is. And before I leave this, I will say, Mr. Minister, we've had a morning, which I think you did not hear completely, which has been absolutely fascinating, full of very, very impressive presentations. Not necessarily sometimes I think all that hopeful, but perhaps you can add some hope to that. And with that, I hope you will come to the podium and speak your piece. We will want to adjourn here in about 20 minutes? No, 40 minutes. 40. You've got a long, I hope you've got a long speech then. Huh? Oh, yes. There will be a Q&A, Mr. Minister. We can't do that without a Q&A at the Wilson Center. It comes with the menu. But I will moderate that. And if there's a really bad question, I'll rephrase it.
Ambassador Milam, Bob, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there are two theories about having someone speak at lunch. Bob is an old friend, and I am inclined to go towards the friendlier theory. The first theory says that if you are enemies with someone, then make him speak at lunchtime, because everybody is busy eating and nobody will follow what the speaker has said. And the friendlier theory says that if you are friends with someone, make his job easy, everybody is eating, and nobody will mind what you have said. So I think that, that's the friendlier part of Bob, that he has scheduled me at the lunch speaking engagement, but it's a great pleasure for me to be here at Woodrow Wilson Center. I have been a regular visitor, and I also admire Bob for being very concerned at a time when I used to see him when we were struggling for democracy in Pakistan, and he used to give us at least his moral support at a time when administrations in DC were very much actively supporting dictatorship, and we would tell our friends that, that is going to create problems. And dictatorships cannot create peace or harmony or cannot fight extremism. Actually, they end up harboring more extremism and more problems. And we always found a very sympathetic ear in Bob, and he was always very caring also, because at that time we were going through a lot of suffering. Agencies would abduct us, they will put us through different tactics, and he was always very concerned about our well-being. So thank you, Bob, and it's again a pleasure to be here at Woodrow Wilson Center. You all have discussed urban challenges, and I would also like to begin with some data which I think really makes us focus on the challenge of urbanization. Because this is an age, an era of cities, and it is said that by 2010, 51% of world population is now living in urban areas, and which is expected to go beyond 70% in next couple of decades. And similarly, the McKinsey's Global Institute has estimated that 50% of global GDP comes from just 362 cities. So that is how cities offer a promise and future. And in case of Pakistan, we find that there are about 9 cities which have population of over 1 million, and 75 cities have a population of over 100,000 in Pakistan. There were 2 cities in 1965 which had population of 500,000, and today there are 13 cities in Pakistan, more than 13, which have population of more than 500,000. So urban challenge or urban sphere of Pakistan's economy has also grown like other urban centers have grown in the global economy. But unfortunately, while urban centers have become catalysts of growth in the world economy, in Pakistan, we have seen that they have not done as well for a number of reasons you have seen. So demographically speaking, Pakistan is the fastest urbanizing country in South Asia. Its urban population is expected to equal its rural population very soon. And currently, the urban population contributes about 3/4 of Pakistan's GDP. The share of the urban population in GDP has more than doubled between 50s and 2000s. However, I have another angle of looking at urbanization. I don't confine merely to physical space, but would like to draw your attention to wider connotation. In my opinion, cultural urbanization is taking place in Pakistan at a much faster pace than urbanization per se. And I urge and argue that developments in information and technology, exposure through media, and market development, and particularly distribution channels, has transformed many of the rural spaces in Pakistan into virtual cities. The production consumption patterns have changed, rural lifestyle is changing, and so are the behaviors of people. The rise of middle class, exposure to urban lifestyle, emergence of new distribution channels, empowered youth, and increasingly rising share of services sector in Pakistan's GDP have changed rural polity. I hail from a rural constituency. 10 years ago, the voters of my constituency used to judge their to-be representatives on the basis of simple criteria, the one who could help in getting their issues resolved in Land Revenue Department and Police Department. Today, besides these two issues, they would also demand better health facilities, improved services of sanitation, piped drinking water, electrification, supply of natural gas in their village, improved infrastructure, better education for their children, and especially road connectivity. It is not only about their micro-level issues, they would also discuss Pakistan's foreign policy, its stance towards drone attacks, perceived level of corruption and inflation, etc. And that is what I call that, in addition to an urban economy, we have an urban-rural economy emerging very fast, where in rural spaces, people are increasingly living in an urban lifestyle. When I go to villages in my election campaigns, there is not a single item which is in use in urban lifestyle that is not available in rural areas. So you are presented all the juices, all the beverages, all the tissue boxes, and everything, every element of urban lifestyle is there in the rural areas and villages. And that is bringing about a very transformational change in the expectations, in the aspirations of the rural population. And at times, I find it very difficult where to draw the line, where urban ends and where rural begins, because these lines are becoming very blurred. A multinational milk pasturing company collects fresh milk from them, so they are running out of fresh milk and would offer you a cup of tea made up from processed and packaged milk in place of a glass of milk, which traditionally used to be part of village hospitality. They would also offer bottled water and box of tissue. I'm quite mindful of the fact that, like any other country, inequality does exist in Pakistan too. The picture of rural transformation which I am portraying here may not be a representative picture, especially in some of the more underdeveloped areas in Punjab, Sindh, KPK, and Balochistan. However, emerging middle class is a major game changer, and one can observe certain degree of cultural urbanization in emerging middle class across Pakistan. I would like to address the questions posed to me in the broader connotation of urbanization. And first things first, government's policy on managing urbanization. At Ministry of Planning, Development and Reform, let me say that, one of the, problems we have faced in last 14 years, in 98, we initiated Pakistan 2010 program that was to develop a plan for next 12 years. In 99, when military government came, it discontinued the plan and instead was not even able to offer any tangible five-year plan to look at the future demands of the country. So largely the country ran for 14 years on year-to-year basis. And in this process, an explosion was taking place in our urban cities, in many other areas of Pakistan's economy, but nobody was looking at the demand supply side. We had, after 9/11, our growth rates go up because of very liberal inflows of reserves that created an artificial period of prosperity. People migrated to cities. There was more consumerism in cities, but then who is going to provide for energy? Who is going to provide for the infrastructure? And that supply side was missing, and as a result, today we see that there is breakdown in energy sector, there is breakdown in infrastructure sector, whether it is urban areas or it is overall infrastructure of the economy. In energy, it is very common to believe that there is a demand and supply issue, that if we have more supply, we will be able to overcome the energy deficit. But to our surprise, we found out that during the month of Ramadan, when we were trying to ensure power supply at the times of start of fast and ending of fast, when we put a load of 16,000 megawatts on the system, the transmission system and distribution system was not capable of handling the load, and it will trip down. So there is this bottleneck of the infrastructure because it was not upgraded for new demands. It is not capable of sustaining the new growth levels which we seek. So the first thing we did was recreated an independent Ministry of Planning and Development and expanded the scope of Ministry of Planning and Development to planning, development, and reform. Because, as you know, we live in very challenging times, in very fast, dynamic environment. And what can more be illustrative of our times than this piece from the Museum of Smartphones called BlackBerry. 2 years ago, it was a market leader, 53%. And today, it is on the brink of bankruptcy. So that is how fast the environment changes. And if we are not able to align our internal responses with these changes, whether these are demographic, whether these are economic, whether these are social, whether these are technological, we run the risk of becoming redundant. So reform has to become a continuous process in governance, and therefore Ministry of Planning Development role was expanded to be planning, development, and reform. Yes, I agree, there is a capacity issue. There is a serious capacity issue, Dr. Nadeem Haq was mentioning, but then what do we do? If there is a capacity issue, and if we have to address it, we have to find new, flexible ways of tackling this problem. So what we are trying to do is we are moving towards a more participatory and collaborative mode of planning and development, where you try to harness the potential, whether it exists in academia or private sector or in diaspora, and create flat structures. Because, as you know, that Friedman has said that the world has become flat. So our planning and our development approach also has to become flat. The whole of Silicon Valley is today investing to create mobile work styles. How can people do multiple tasks, not by going to their offices, but maybe wherever they are, and they can do different tasks. So that is the new mode in which we are trying to attract some talent from within the country and outside the country in a virtual setting, so that the whole planning process becomes a virtual planning process, and we are not constrained by the geographic presence of those experts if they are not willing to join us. I may also say that we have also launched some of the very little off track, but this is our response, how we are responding to the capacity issue. We have started a Young Development Fellows Program, and I cannot tell you what we have found, how much talent is there in young Pakistani professionals. This is a program of fellowship for 1 year. We are giving them very meager stipend, which is peanuts, but we have found young professionals who are passionate about this country, who are graduates of Harvard University, of Yale, of Carnegie Mellon, of UPenn, of London School of Economics, and top universities and schools from within Pakistan, LUMS, and outside Pakistan, who are willing to come and work for 1 year and give their best shot to making a change or being part of the change in Pakistan. So we have to then, try to create new innovative systems. We have partnership with the Pakistan Business Council, and we have asked them to finance salary of 7 to 8 professionals, which we cannot afford to pay out of government rules. So the private sector must support or sponsor their market-based salary structures, and they will be parked with us, they will work for us. So that will be one way of attracting talent from the market while we attract them on the market salaries, but government is not paying and we do not come under any binding that how have we recruited them, because they will be recruited by Pakistan's premier business council on merit and through a transparent way. So this is how we have to build the governance structures. One of the major problem in our urban management was the 2002 devolution scheme, which was introduced by General Musharraf. And it played havoc with our capacity or governance. What it did was, it demoralized the civil service, and there was a mass exodus of at least 300 to 400 very young, bright civil servants who left the civil service of Pakistan and joined the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, other banks, because they were totally disillusioned with the reform. And the other thing which this reform did was, it clubbed urban and rural centers together. So if I was a Tehsil Nazim, there was no distinction between the urban jurisdiction of my domain and the rural jurisdiction. So, I mean, the whole focus on urban issues was lost. So, as a result, we had serious capacity issues. Devolution was done without catering to the capacity issues at district level. So, what we see, I remember in 2002, I wrote an article in the news paper that very soon the first victim of this urban areas will be the public health engineering, and people will be left without clean drinking water. And within 3 to 4 years, we saw total collapse of public health engineering infrastructure, because the government had devolved this department without creating any capacity in the districts. So sometimes when you do reforms which are not in the right sequence, which do not have buy-in of all the stakeholders, those reforms play havoc. And that is what happened in 2002 devolution scheme, which was done in Pakistan without buy-in of the civil servants, without buy-in of the political parties, and without thinking about the sequencing of the reform, that if you have to devolve, you also need to create capacities in the local structure so that they can handle the new responsibilities. The result was, there was no capacity, the powers were devolved, and we saw gradually breakdown of infrastructure in urban areas. And that has made the whole challenge very complex. So now we are working on Pakistan's Vision 2025, a long-term plan to create a roadmap on which, through which, how can we not just fix our problems, but also can put Pakistan on a fast growth trajectory. A country which has overwhelming young population, which has a population growth rate of 2%. If it grows at 3 and 3.5%, then for sure we are setting it up for a spring revolution in every spring. If we want stability, we have to produce high growth platform for the economy, which is 6 to 7%. And if we at least, and if that is the platform we want to set for country, then the urban centers as catalysts, as drivers of growth come in perspective and have a very important role to play. An emphasis is being laid on slowing down movement from rural to urban migration, as well as coping with the issues of peri-urbanization by providing better civic amenities in rural areas. Because our infrastructure is already overloaded, if we do not block, or if we do not control, or if we do not check this migration from rural areas to urban areas, it's going to become a lot worse. So we also need to create some dynamism in the rural markets through rural enterprise, so that there is employability, there are better opportunities of life in rural areas, so that we can contain this massive migration towards urban areas which are not capable of even servicing the present load of population. Better livelihood opportunities, better education facilities, better health facilities, and better living styles are some of the major triggers behind rural to urban migration. Majority of them would never leave the land of their ancestors if they have better income opportunities, better education, and better health facilities around them. We aim to take development to the doorsteps of every Pakistani, irrespective of the fact whether he or she is residing in a village, town, city, or in a metropolitan. They all are Pakistanis, and government of Pakistan is bound to provide them a decent life, because we already have an inequality and poverty along urban and rural areas. So, you know, if we have more inequality, no matter how fast we grow, that's going to create problems down the road. So one of our goals is to create an inclusive growth, not marginalize any community, not marginalize any sector of economy, and how while we focus on some of the fast drivers of growth, which is like urban centers, but at the same time do not marginalize further the rural communities. In practical terms, we would be developing intermediate cities in the peri-urban regions to attract and hold migrating population from rural to urban regions in and around megacities. You know, one of the key philosophies given to us in our religion is, don't let your cities grow too big. And we see that, you know, when cities were allowed to grow too big without any planning, we have crisis like what we have in Karachi. That, you know, we have a mega city with no infrastructure, with no governance, and we have all the crimes and all the situation what we see today. A key component in this stage involves reviewing urbanization policies in other countries of the region, especially in China, where such approach of building intermediate cities has met with some success. Realizing that large metropolitan areas in China were no longer capable of absorbing additional migrants from rural China, the government actively pursued the idea of developing new cities, as well as upgrading existing small towns to become mid-sized cities with an average population of 1 million. The focus will be on how to develop and finance new infrastructure in small towns so that they are capable of absorbing migrating populations. We have a vision to provide certain minimum basic facilities across all districts. Capitalizing upon this minimum basic, the new elected district government under the local government systems would be able to raise its own revenue and spend it on local development of its respective district. Through collective action, we would be able to halt the changing land use plans where fertile agricultural lands are rapidly turning into peri-urban and urban areas, posing a risk to food security and food sovereignty to our 180 plus million inhabitants. In the new local government system, we have made some reforms now, and we are hoping that the elections will take place very soon. There is a schedule which has been announced for Sindh end of this month, and in Punjab beginning of December, and I think other provinces are also making their preparations. So we hope that within next 3 months, there will be local bodies in the country. We have made some reforms. One, in Punjab, the local government system we have introduced, our party. We have gone back to the old system where there were separate local bodies for urban centers and separate local bodies for rural areas, because both rural and urban areas have different sets of problems. And other thing which we have done, because there was a capacity issue in the local bodies, we have created a window for professionals and technocrats to become members of the local bodies through reserved seats. The technocrats will be, who could be doctors, engineers, educationists, town planners, architects. They could become members of the local bodies through indirect election. And that, I think, will go a long way in bringing quality representation in the local bodies and create that critical mass of people, professionals, who will be able to drive these local bodies more professionally. The rapid urban growth is almost invariably accompanied by congestion, pollution, deficits in the provision of civic services, formation of peri-urban slums, increase in crime rate and urban poverty. The municipal infrastructure of the major cities of Pakistan, such as Lahore, Faisalabad, and Karachi, has far exceeded its carrying capacity as a result of rapid and unchecked population growth. Much of this malaise can be attributed to the development policies based on the silos approach between rural and urban areas, as reflected in the division of policies along spatial and sectoral lines, rural development programs and urban management programs. And let me clarify that while we also create, again, separate rural and urban local bodies, we are mindful that we cannot allow rural and urban local bodies to again take us back into those silos. There is so much which takes place in the interface of rural and urban development. So there will be these coordination mechanisms set up and under which rural and urban local bodies will interact for cross-cutting reforms and development projects. None of these initiatives was given much thought to the complex dynamics of rural-urban interactions and the ways in which urban and rural livelihoods were intertwined. Understanding this nexus and focusing on linkages across space, such as flows of people, goods, revenues, and information, and across sectors such as urban agriculture and non-farm activities in rural areas, is the basis of our government's policy to manage urbanization. We are aiming to turn challenges of urbanizations into opportunities. We want to develop our cities in a manner that curtails unplanned expansion and slum dwellings. And people often say, despite whatever the Islamabad model of development is, but still, nevertheless, that is one city where you can see some orderliness or some semblance of planning. It is because Islamabad had a master plan. And although there have been some complaints of deviation, but by and large, they have grown through a master plan. So you see some order in Islamabad's growth. But in other major cities, I tell you, when I was in this ministry in 98, 99, before the military coup, we did a project for urban development. And to my horror, I found out till 99, 98, no major city had a master plan. Even Karachi did not have a master plan. And that is when we asked them to start a master plan so that, the whole growth can be under some framework. So this unplanned growth is largely responsible for all the problems we have in our cities. So we are updating and upgrading the master plans of 10 largest cities of Pakistan so that we can grow according to a roadmap. And we have set up urban planning units. In Punjab, the urban planning unit is using the new technology to do town planning and urban planning on more professional and modern basis. And that also gives us a lot of insight into land use and other issues of infrastructure development in urban areas. An argument is made that Pakistan's urban expansion is mostly lateral, which has spatial limitations, so it has to grow vertically. I do buy this argument, but I think we have to also see the context. Energy deficit is our major worry and concern because Pakistan is in extreme weather conditions. How can you build 20-story buildings when you don't have electricity to run the elevators or you don't have electricity to run air conditioning or heating systems? So in the absence of electricity or in the absence of power, if you construct those 10, 20-storied buildings, they will only become monuments of your energy crisis where they will remain unoccupied. And I don't think that anybody would like to live in those ovens, without air conditioning at 20th floor with heat at 40, 45 degrees centigrades. So therefore, even, if we have to look for vertical development, the impediment to vertical development is energy. So energy is what is holding our urban development, is holding our economic development, and has a cost of 2 to 3%. By 2 to 3% of growth rate is suppressed because of this energy crisis. Then energy reminds me of our fuel imports, which may be drastically reduced if we have efficient mass transit system in urban areas. Like all other mega cities of the world, most of our large cities are without any mass transit projects and are facing huge traffic congestion and carbon emission from vehicles contributing to air pollution and ozone depletion. This is turned worst in the absence of mass transit. And during the previous stint of PMLN government in Punjab, we took an innovative step, and in a record period, our provincial government introduced country's first mass transit metro bus project in Lahore. And it has had a profound impact on the city of Lahore. And the whole driving experience has changed on some of the major roads where the project has been able to cut down congestion very drastically. The travel time has become more predictable, and many factory owners and businessmen have told me that how their whole work is transformed because their workforce, which used to previously take 2 hours or 3 hours, sometimes late by 3 hours or 4 hours by traffic congestion, can be at work exactly in a very predictable 20 or 30-minute journey. So they're always in time, and their work productivity has increased greatly. So this is how what we are hoping that our vision of managing urbanization in cities with efficient mass transit system is to take this further. And now we are planning to introduce metro bus and mass transit projects in all major cities, especially in Karachi, Faisalabad, Peshawar, and Rawalpindi, Islamabad. Besides mass transit system, the federal government also believes in facilitating provinces towards urban and city-specific commercial reforms, because urban management is a provincial subject, and we have to understand in Pakistan after 18th Amendment, the whole context of economic planning has changed. Now provinces have more resources and they have more responsibilities. Urban development comes within the jurisdiction of provinces. However, we feel that if the subject has been devolved, that does not take away the role from the federal government to play the role of a facilitator or a coordinator. Because if federal government did not coordinate with the provinces, we run the risk that devolution is going to further increase inequalities between the provinces. The provinces with better capacity will grow much faster, and the provinces with lesser capacity are going to be left behind. So we have a role to coordinate with the provinces, where we facilitate sharing of best practices amongst provinces, and we sort of create a setting where provinces compete with each other on service delivery and better facilities for the citizens. One of the key examples of this has been observed in the past 3 years, whereby the government of Punjab has initiated automation of land records, reform of zoning and building regulations, and amendments to Agriculture Marketing Produce Act, which in the past used to hinder with rightful access of farmers to urban agriculture markets. The land record computerization is another very significant intervention which we have made, and we intend to take it to all provinces in partnership with the provinces, because there is this there are so many studies which show that when you give people right of ownership of their property, and if they have lawful legal documents, that economically empowers them and enables their entrepreneurship to come out much more faster. So the link between your property ownership and your economic contribution is one of the very strong correlations, and I think this land record computerization project is going to be a very major step in that direction. We believe that urban markets where the act of exchange takes place is a value provider for rural farm and non-farm entrepreneurs, and help towards a balanced growth across the country, while also producing affordable prices to the residents in the urban areas. We are also mindful that supplementary reform of labor and capital markets are important in retaining people's energies in cities. In order to do so, we have demonstrated during our 5-year tenure in Punjab that there is a need to revisit the role of state as a service provider. It is in the same spirit our government has allocated funds for low-cost housing schemes in its federal budget after coming into power in May 2013 election. And now federal government is trying to do development in suburban areas and provide low-cost housing in the cities, not just to provide better facilities to residents, but also as a means of jump-starting the economy through construction industry. Ministry of Planning, Development and Reforms is actively working with other federal entities in order to plan and coordinate these projects as part of the implementation process of Vision 2025. And in order to ensure needs of an urbanizing Pakistan, our ministry is working in close coordination with Ministries of Housing, Works, Inter-Provincial Coordination, National Food Security and Climate Change divisions. The Vision 2025 is based on 7 pillars, and that is a framework with which we are going to address the issue of urban development as well as the rural development. And the 7 pillars are: 1, energy security through an integrated policy. Without energy, there can neither be urban development nor there can be rural development. So our number 1 priority is to focus on energy, provide energy. If you don't have energy, it's like having a BMW standing outside your house and you have no fuel to run it. So you can have a good look at it, but you cannot drive it. So right now, lack of energy is hindering our economic potential, the potential of growth in the cities. The cranes will not come up unless there is energy. And unfortunately, energy is not there because in last 14 years, the thinking or planning was not done that what will it take to sustain our growth in future and what should we do now in order to support energy in future. So now we have decided that we will look beyond 2013 and look up to 2025 and see that what are our energy needs and how can we not only meet our today's needs, but also tomorrow's needs. Secondly, creating a modern infrastructure. Now, our present infrastructure is not capable of sustaining growth rates. As I said, we have the bottlenecks in power sector, we have bottlenecks in transportation sector, our roads, our rails, our ports, everything is very much a bottleneck to support higher levels of growth. So we need to upgrade our infrastructure in cities and in the country. That's our second priority. 3, resource mobilization. You cannot fuel growth if you do not have your domestic resource base. Unfortunately, in 1999, we left 13.5% of tax to GDP ratio. Today, it is down to 9% of tax to GDP ratio. If you don't have your domestic resources, you cannot fuel growth on borrowed money. There has to be generation of domestic resources to build this new infrastructure, to build for the new development projects which we think there should be out there. So we are therefore focusing on tax reforms so that we take back our tax to GDP ratio to 13 to 14%. We are focusing on science, technology, and innovation so that we create more endogenous drivers of growth. And we are focusing on export sector-led growth, which will be through a cottage industry in the cities, and that will also help us revive the urban growth. Number 3, we are moving we want to move down the value chain from low value to high value. And that requires creating technology triangles. Technology triangles between public sector, private sector, and research and academia. Over last 10, 15 years, one thing nice which has happened in Pakistan, and again, I would not hesitate to say that I feel very happy that in 98, through Vision 2010, we laid the foundations of this intervention in Pakistan's higher education program, where we started a very massive intervention to upgrade Pakistan's competence in higher education through PhD programs in the foreign universities and indigenous PhD programs. And we allocated very sizable funds. And the good thing was that through Dr. Ataur Rahman, who was my team member in this project, when he became Minister for Science and Technology, we had continuity. So he continued this program. And the result is today, Pakistani universities have a major robustness in terms of new manpower, in terms of these new young researchers who are out there and now returning from overseas universities, best universities, and some are product of local universities, and who are now trying to do research in our own problems. So how do we create research, private sector, and government triangle as a collaborative arrangement for future development of our export sector and our economy is very critical. And that is the mode in which we are trying to go forward. Then building social capital and human capital. In in cities, it was amazing that we found out that we build new localities And everybody thought that in these new localities there will be rich and affluent who will live. So they did not provide any space for government schools. So we have huge settlements. You know, if you go in Lahore, start from Faisal Town, Johar Town, for those of you who know Lahore, huge settlements, not a single government school. So they assume that all of the children from these areas are going to go to grammar schools and city schools, but where will the children of the house servants or some other poor people living in those areas will go was nobody's business. So, and then we have a problem that, you know, because these plots were not allocated, so when government cannot buy housing, in housing schemes, plots for educational institutions on marketplaces. So we are now making an arrangement whereby government will be able to enforce certain conditions on these private housing societies and also the government housing societies, where there will be a mandatory provision of government health and education facilities so that we can cater to all sections of our society. So education and healthcare will be a major investment and priority for us to create growth. Because in the past we had this hardware driven approach towards development. You know, create high rises, create brick and mortar, and that's symbol of development. That's half of the story. You know, there has to be enterprise in people. There has to be a work ethic in the people. There has to be the right skills. There has to be right education. It is the software, the human face. It is the human genius which actually becomes the power to turn that hardware into real value. If computers don't have the software, they are just worth the sheet metal and plastic that goes into it. So we are trying to bring that focus back on education, on social and human capital, and how can we create communities, peaceful communities in cities, and how can we learn from Karachi, and we do not let a repeat of Karachi take place in other major growing cities of Lahore and Faisalabad and Rawalpindi, which are expanding, so that we can avoid the pitfalls of a lack of planning and growth in Karachi, and how can we insulate these new urban cities are one of our priorities. So I think, you know, how much time is left? 5 more minutes. So, you know, I would like to then say that, touch upon 2 unique dimensions of urbanization, which merit further deliberation in Pakistani context and would be an important component of our Vision 2025. First, as I said before, try to streamline rural to urban migration in Pakistan, predominantly involving men who first migrate to cities searching for employment. Years, sometimes decades later, they become financially secure and then have the rest of the family relocate to cities. During the initial stages, women stay behind in villages, attending to family, land, and cattle. Thus, urbanization in Pakistan poses unique gender-based challenges, which result from the segregation of the basic family unit. Our government is focusing on gender-based dynamics of urbanization with a focus on the challenges faced by women left behind in villages with additional maintenance burdens. Mindful of this fact, we are planning to initiate special sports schemes for rural women, especially to meet their health and dietary needs through strengthening lady health workers and model health unit schemes. Second unique dimension of urbanization in Pakistan is the role of internally displaced people. While the economic determinants of urbanization have been studied in considerable detail, the impact of internally displaced people on urbanization, especially when the internally displaced are not repatriated to their rural communities years later, has not been fully explored or understood. In 2009, Pakistan recorded the highest number of internally displaced people, that over 3 million individuals. A large number of those were displaced, had to leave their homes because of the terrorist violence and the government's response against the perpetrators of violence. In addition, natural disasters such as earthquake in 2005 and the floods in 2010 also displaced millions of Pakistanis. We want to focus on hitherto ignored role of internally displaced individuals who migrate in a large numbers in a small period of time to urban areas, resulting in demand shocks for shelter, water, food, security, waste management, health, schooling, and jobs. The challenges and opportunities of urbanization are numerous, and one can talk about them for hours. But I'm quite mindful of paucity of time and would quickly touch upon next question, which is extremely interesting in the context of Pakistan, whether it is possible or feasible to build political constituencies in Pakistan on behalf of a more forward-leaning approach to anticipating and mitigating the urban challenges Pakistan will face in the coming decades. I am a firm believer that both urban as well as rural areas in Pakistan no longer function as mere space of settlement, production, and service. They now profoundly shape and influence social and political relations at every level, determining advances and setbacks in mode of production and providing new contents to norms, culture, and politics. However, the growing population of cities, especially in cities like Karachi, home to 15 to 20 million people, because we still have a census to take place and then only we would know the accurate figure. Lahore, home to more than 10 million people, Faisalabad and few others which would soon touch 10 million population, mean that these cities can shape the national political agenda. Having realized the importance of cities and political landscape, we cannot say that political constituencies are being organized around the rural-urban divide. The mainstream parties which can reach the voters across Pakistan, like PMLN, can manage to get their candidates elected, both from rural as well as from urban constituencies. It is important, therefore, that utmost effort should be done by parties in power to bridge the various divides between haves and have-nots across rural and urban areas. The urban and rural divide in Sindh has a different context that is more on ethnic basis rather than urban or rural divide. In the end, I wish to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for taking such an important initiative and bringing Pakistan's important issues like urbanization on the forefront. Our government is very committed to developing the fullest potential of our urban centers and also to listening from national as well as international think tanks and research community. And we very much would like to strengthen these linkages because, as I said, the model, the course of action for us for future is developing a triangle of public, private sector, and research and academia. So the knowledge has to constantly drive into our policies and into implementation. One of the challenges we face, which in the words of a Harvard professor, is that a sick organization has a huge knowing-doing gap. You know a lot of things, but you do a very poor job of implementing them. So we have to bridge this knowing-doing gap, and with the help of think tanks like Woodrow Wilson Center and other research institutions, we want to have feedback which will enable us to put this knowledge into practice. If the knowledge is not put into practice, its value is lost. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has already approved setting up a high-power advisory committee for our Ministry of Planning, Development and Reform, comprising of members of think tanks and academic research institutions. And I've realized that most of the members of our advisory committee have delivered lectures at Woodrow Wilson Center, which reflects the importance of the center as well as the academic credibility of the thinking community to whom we are reaching out for their situation analysis and global stock of lessons learned. So, ladies and gentlemen, a planet free from hunger, poverty, fear of war, terrorism, coercion, and needs is possible. However, to reach there, we would have to start with a society free of all of the above-mentioned malaise. I am hopeful that together we can work for sustainable societies, countries, regions, and planet. Thank you once again for your attention. So, I take questions here? Huh? Yeah, I can take 3-4 questions.
3 questions?
Yeah.
I'm going to follow my instructions, although I'm not known for doing that. 3 questions. There's a Marvin Weinbaum over there. Wait a minute, I think there's a, hold it. I think there's a microphone coming your way. Have I got a question on this side in the meantime? You've answered all their questions to the right, Mr. Minister. Go ahead, Marvin.
Wonderful to have you here. Historically, one of the manifestations of urbanization has been that population, the rate of population growth declines. It's often said that Pakistan has not followed that phenomenon as other countries have. Now, Minister, you've spoken a great deal here about planning on so many fronts, but the one area which you've not touched on is family planning. And one has to ask whether so much of what you are intending to do is not, after all, undermined by that fact.
Yeah, that's very important area, and again, this is an area which is not devolved to the provinces, and but still, it is not an area of which we can, as I said, in many of the social area responsibilities which have gone to the provinces, we cannot say that we have no responsibility, because overall, if population growth rates are not checked, they have a direct bearing on our development strategy. So we are promoting, we are pushing population control programs. Along with the traditional population programs, what I can safely say that the strongest correlation and the most effective program of population control is promoting education in the girls. An educated mother has a planned family. And if you look at the large families, it is mostly with uneducated mothers. So therefore, while we do our traditional population planning programs, we are very actively promoting education of girls to bridge the gender gap which exists in education sector. And I think through this multi-pronged approach, we should be able to control it. We have made some progress. 20 years ago, it used to be 2.93%. It has come down from there to about 2%. And now there are also strong economic pressures which are working actually both ways. In certain areas, they are forcing people to go for smaller families. And in certain poverty circles, they actually become an incentive for families to have larger families because they have free labor on their fields or in their settings. So it is quite a complex challenge, but we are committed and we want to bring it further down.
I'm looking for people who haven't asked questions before. I see a gentleman way over there in the back.
You talked about Musharraf's system, local body system, but your party, Pakistan Muslim League, did not conduct the local bodies elections for the last, I think, more than 7 years. So the people were deprived of local bodies. Why? And second, you talked about urban migration. As I know, PMLN is a party of big cities. And you have more focus about Lahore, Faisalabad, big cities. And you never facilitated the people of far off areas. Why?
I think the first question, local bodies, it is important to have this clarification that we have always held local bodies elections previously in both tenures where we were in office. This time the delay in local body election was because there was a consensus among all political actors that we need to change the system. And the previous system had a constitutional protection till 2010. And after it was finished, then under 18th Amendment, the responsibility and onus for holding of elections shifted from provinces to the Election Commission of Pakistan. And Commission of Pakistan was given the responsibility for developing new electoral rolls. If we had local bodies elections under a different electoral roll and later on had national elections on a different electoral roll, that would have been very controversial because some opposition parties were challenging the electoral rolls under which 2008 elections were held. So as soon as Election Commission finished its electoral rolls, there was time for the national elections. And I think the right sequence is also to have local bodies election come immediately following the general elections. Because there is this debate also in the country that local bodies sometimes are used to influence the general elections. And then that way there is no ownership of this local body system in the country from the new governments which come later on. So I think now we are following the right sequence, that there is a general election and now local bodies election will take place and the terms of the office will almost expire together, because in the local body system we have enacted, we have put in this clause that it is either a 5-year term or a general election, whichever comes first, the local bodies will be dissolved. So that, people cannot complain that local bodies have been used for political advantage in the general elections. And our party has both rural and urban mandate. I think if you look at our success in this election, probably we have more seats from the rural areas, and I represent a very typical rural constituency.
You don't look like a farmer, though. Last question, right here.
I think we should have some gender balance in the questions.
Gender balance, yeah, but, okay. Ladies, are there any ladies? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, no.
she has been having
No,
her hand
look at here's one over here. This will be the last
Thanks for the
question.
gender balance.
Go ahead.
I'm just concerned about crime and violence, because recently when I visited Pakistan, I was really concerned about my own safety. And it's really surprising because you see the population very vulnerable. And I'm just surprised that nobody has mentioned crime and violence, which would really have a strong bearing on your urban, urban social capital, or, the life you're, planning or envisioning.
Well, there are different, again, aspects to it. One, there is Karachi, which has a very peculiar significance. Karachi was hostage to violence for many years because the state was not functioning there. Somehow all the coalition partners were protecting their kinds of people. So, there was free for all thing. But now we have taken everybody on board, all political parties, civil society, businessmen. And in Karachi, you see a continuous security operation against these mafias, criminals, and we have also changed the laws, made special provisions for protection of judges and witnesses so that we can bring these criminals and terrorists to law and we can, punish them. That is now beginning to show some improvement. This is the feedback we get from Karachi. In other cities, because of the, I think, breakdown of economy, there is also a rapid increase in street crime because of the large-scale unemployment, and that is also a contributor. The third is the capacity of our security institutions. We are now developing model police stations, trying to develop better capacity of police, and introducing camera surveillance in cities, which will, I think, greatly help us to improve the security situation. And one last question to balance the gender thing. I use my speaker prerogative.
You have more than that.
Ji.
Very much. I had 4 quick questions for you.
No, one.
How do you, there is this unfinished business of the 18th Amendment, and there was an anomalies process which was constitutionally enshrined, but which was unfinished by the last government. Now that has several implications, because on the one hand, as you very rightly said, one of the important mandates of the federal government is to bring the provinces at par. But after the 18th Amendment, neither does the Federation have that mandate, nor does it have the instruments. Secondly, the issue of the federal government's role is not restricted to coordination, because the Constitution and the federal legislative list stipulate that regulation is very much a federal role in a country where trade of services is guaranteed by the Constitution under Article 151, as is the case in the United States. In addition, international treaties and all the business of international development falls on the plate of the federal government. And as you have very rightly articulated some of these things yourself, where do you see the anomalies process? And what plans do you have for getting it underway? Because it has huge implications for many of the things that your government has embraced as a policy goal.
First of all, let me say that we missed you in our advisory committee meeting. Probably you came America a little early. So I hope that you are there in the next meeting. So this is to show that, the advisory committee we have set up, we have these people from civil society, academia, private sector, and we want this collaborative economic management in the country. You have, touched upon a very important aspect of devolution. Unfortunately, the devolution was done in the right spirit, but its implementation was hurried. It was done very hurriedly. And they did not cater for some of the linkages which should have been provided in order for this devolution to work. And now people are realizing the gaps. And I think the first thing is to start with some kind of coordination. And I have found that, when a ministry which has been devolved calls the provinces back, for example, if it is health, calling the health departments back to health ministry, their antennas go up. What is it? Are they taking back? Why are they calling us? But we have found that in our ministry, we have this unique advantage that we can call Federal Ministry of Health and the provinces and coordinate many of these issues on regulation and some of the other standards which need to go into managing these areas. So they come without any hesitation and they are too willing to come. So this is one of the roles we hope that Planning Ministry will perform under its mandate for reforms, that we take the devolution scheme to the next level and where we plug the gaps which there are in terms of its implementation and in terms of some of the regulatory and coordination mechanisms. Okay.
Mr. Minister, we thank you. It's a great honor to host you. I know you have to leave. I wish you could stay for the following reason. There's been a number of references that a lot of this morning's commentary was pretty pessimistic. Well, this afternoon, immediately, we're going into a session titled Private Sector Solutions. So I think we'll be looking at the opposite side of the coin.
Through this pessimism, just 2 minutes. Listen, Pakistan should be seen from the prism not of the weather factors, but of the climatic factors. Any system is judged on its health on climatic factor and weather factor. You can catch influenza, which is the weather factor. You can be knocked down with influenza, you are sick to the bed, you feel terrible, but influenza will be gone, you'll be back up and kicking. But if, God forbid, one has a terminal illness, that is a cause of concern. Now then you are gone. So if you look in Pakistan, all the climatic factors which relate to health of the ecosystem, most of them are on a very positive trajectory. We have seen that the rule of law movement has gained strength and it is on an ascendancy path. Judiciary is becoming more and more independent. Rule of law is exerting itself. 2, there is growing consensus on constitutionalism. Failing societies have discord and conflict on constitutionalism. We have done it with consensus. 3, political actors are showing signs of maturity. They are collaborating and competing simultaneously. This is what we call in business and management a mature industry, where Pepsi Cola and Coke can fiercely compete with each other on market share, but when it comes to the industry share of cola industry, they have the capability to collaborate. So political actors in Pakistan have competed and collaborated simultaneously. That shows a very healthy sign. We have a growing consensus on the direction of the state, that military has no business. We need to pursue peace with India. We need to have friendships with Afghanistan, and we need no kind of interference in Afghanistan. Let Afghanistanis decide what is best for their country. So this kind of consensus is a very positive sign. 4th, a growing freedom of expression. I have not seen a society fail where the freedom of expression is on ascendancy path. Every attack on media by any force of status quo actually ends up giving more power to media rather than reversing the freedom of media. And 5th, a growing civil society, a growing, engaging citizenry of Pakistan, which is becoming ever more engaged with how the affairs of the state are run. Now, these are all signs of an ecosystem, of a climate which has a promising future. We had bad weather patch with previous government's performance, and hopefully we look forward to making a difference by bringing good governance, transparency, and better economic performance, and to align the weather factors with the climatic factors so that we can create the kind of synergy which a nation needs to go on a fast-paced development. So that much for pessimism.
That's a good note on which to conclude this session. We have two very good speakers in the next session, and I'd like to encourage everybody to move smartly back to where we were on the fifth floor, because Khurram Hussain is going to call that meeting together in 6 minutes.